Hey, good morning, everybody. We're live. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group here with my good friend, Alan Sayler, who is the managing partner with the Center for Food Safety and Regulatory Solutions. How you doing, Alan?
I'm doing great. It's not as early as where you are, so I've already got half my day done.
Now, you're in the DC area, and you've got a pretty heavy-looking outfit on there. Is it pretty cold?
Well, surprisingly, for DC, we had 90s last week, and then we were in the 60s this week. We've got a cold front coming through, so toward the end of our little chat today, tornado watches are out, so we'll see.
Really? I didn't even know you guys could get tornadoes back there.
Not usually, but it's been an interesting spring.
Definitely, it sounds like it. So if you're new to this, this is the Food Safety Chat Live. And this is a pretty cool thing in that every Friday at this time, 10 a.m. Eastern where Alan is, and 8 a.m. Mountain Time where I am at in Colorado, we get together and we talk about a topic around food safety. Now, if you're new to this, one of the things you're going to notice right away is that this is not a presentation. This is meant to be a discussion. So I have the honor of bringing in great industry experts like Alan to talk about particular subjects. And this is your opportunity then to ask us questions. My assistant Renee is on, and he'll be popping up notes during our conversation here today and helping to facilitate. So as you all know, one of the things that's really important with food safety is it's not something that is strictly limited to a company. This is something that impacts us all. So if one company has a recall, it impacts all of us. And this is something that we've been seeing really clearly here in the past few weeks with a couple of high profile recalls that we're going to be talking about a little bit as well. So as Tim and Austin have done here, please, jump in the chat and tell us where you're from and say hello. And you can talk with your other people on here as well who are in the chat too. We have the live stream going, so you can punch in your questions and ask about different topics and things of that nature. Barbara, nice to see you as well. Super happy to have everybody here. So part of this is one of the rituals we like to have with this, and Renee knows this very well, is I love to jump into the topic too early. But one of the rituals we like to have here at the Food Safety Chat is for everybody to join us with your favorite beverage. And what have you, awesome, kefir. Oh, look at you. Aren't you healthy? Got the kefir going there. And I've got my coffee, not as healthy as Alan. So please join us. Ah, so good. Enjoy that cup of coffee, get that dopamine hit going there. So Jennifer from the UK, hope your day is going well. So any good plans for the Memorial Day weekend and your chilly weekend tornado weather? Or
Well, interestingly enough, we kind of a one-off issue. We like to buy our meat, for those of you that are meat eaters. If you're not, my apologies, but we like to buy our meat directly from ranchers in the area. So tomorrow I get to travel about an hour up into Maryland, into the rural areas, to buy a half a side of beef.
Wow, a whole half. That's a lot. Nice. That's going to keep you keep your freezer full for quite a while.
Yeah, it feeds a few families.
So if I want a good steak, I know where to go. That's for sure.
Exactly. This is Angus. So.
Ooh, nice. So Carrie's joining us from Tucson, and that's one of the things that's really fun about the chat is if you attend with us live, right, which is the best way to do this, you'll see that we have people who attend here on a regular basis and some new people who come in every now and then. And one of the things I like to say on here too is I just love that, right, because your commitment to food safety and your willingness to learn and grow is what makes our industry better. And the more of us who participate in these type of things, and we're seeing this now too, right, where the GFSI conference and some of the other conferences now, attendance is coming back. And we're finally going to be able to get out there and see each other in person again and have lunch together and swap interesting stories and methodologies of how to do things. So I think we're turning a corner here, which is great. Sandip, good morning to you, and Cheryl, nice to see you as well. So one of the things that Alan and I were talking about as we were preparing for the chat here earlier this week is some of these high profile recalls. So of course, Abbott Labs and the recall that took place with the infant formula, and some of the information now is coming out on that, and the consent decree. We see where the government now has got involved and infant formula manufacturers in the other countries are sending in product for babies, right? Because babies have to have infant formula. There's no, a friend of mine said to reference your purchase, right? They can't chew on a steak, right? They have to have baby food, and that's a huge issue. So it's good that we're starting to get some information and some products out there relative to that. So always happy to see that. The other big recall that hit here pretty recently was another peanut butter recall, Alan. I saw that. I was like, oh no, not again. And since this started, and the recall was just announced by Jif last Friday, there have been 11 recalls already as a result of this. And when you look at the recall page from FDA on this and the amount of products that they are recalling with this, it's like, wow, a ton. And part of that then too is, and that's why this ties into our conversation, Alan, is environmental monitoring, right? So FDA is saying, hey, we found some stuff in your plant. And even if it's not a direct link to what we're seeing out there with some of the infants that are ill, we're still going to take action.
I think that environmental monitoring is the root cause of most of all of the food contaminations that are microbiological in origin. And there's no doubt that even though the whole genome sequencing for Abbot did not link the environmentals to the product contamination, they were cousins. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Yeah.
They weren't from the same family, but they were cousins. So does that mean, well, that Abbott, the environmentals were okay, it was just some other mysterious way? I think not. And with Jif, you can say that they had a failure of their roasting, right? This is what we do in the United States in order to eliminate salmonella for peanuts, to process the peanuts into peanut butter and other products. And you can say, well, the root cause was their failure to have proper roasting. But how did the salmonella get into peanuts in the first place? It could be endemic. It could be that, you know what, salmonella is just in peanuts and you just better get used to it. Or it could be, is it a resident strain? One of the things, and I'd like to hear your thoughts and others, is the information I've seen is that the whole genome sequencing for the Jif salmonella is the same, and this is very unusual, the same as an environmental monitoring salmonella sample that they found in the same plant in 2010. So this is like in the United States, the FBI fingerprinting. This now, there's a database that FDA and CDC have that go back 15, 20 years now. And so does this mean that the failure was the roasting? Does this mean there's a resident strain of salmonella in the facility that they've never gotten rid of and something happened and that environmental issue became a product issue?
It's a good question. I mean, let's kind of walk people through what FDA does, right? So there's an issue, or FDA just shows up for an inspection and wants to do a swabathon. What takes place during that?
Well, certainly I've worked with many companies that have undergone that, and sometimes the swabathons have been initiated by customers, not just government, not FDA, but essentially, it is a very intense, and they take samples. Sometimes you think every square inch of the non-product contact surfaces, and I do want to talk about product versus non-product in the environmental monitoring program. I think that's an important subject at some point today. But rarely do they take less than 100 samples. I've been in rooms or in facilities and FDA had done a swabathon, and they had two rooms that were probably a total of 50 feet by 50 feet. How do you get 100 samples? But they do. And, it's our government's tax money at work. But the point is, they're very thorough. Their people are well trained in taking the samples because you can really mess up environmental monitoring just by not knowing how to sample. And I will be frank with you, there's a lot of people in the industry that don't know because it's so simple. It's like, well, everybody knows how to drive a car. What's the big problem? Well, you can make mistakes. I love the talk I had with a company earlier this week, and they were talking about, they were at corporate. They had many, many food plants, and they had a protocol when a food plant would send environmental monitoring samples to their central laboratory, and then they would have positives. And he said, I always had to chuckle, and our laboratory people had to chuckle when they opened up the bag with the follow-up environmental samples and they could smell sanitizer.
Yeah.
And thought, does that do anybody any good? So I'll let you give your thoughts, please.
Right. Yes. I mean, yeah, if your goal is to get a negative test and kind of do the whole, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil thing, great, right? But you're fooling yourself, right? Do you think FDA is going to do that? No, they are not. And I think one of the biggest things that came out and has really flown under the radar, and I've got my email here if somebody wants a copy of it, I can send it to you, or you can just Google the search on this, is FDA updated their operations inspections manual last year. And in chapter 4, they have environmental monitoring. And if you have not read that, oh my goodness, you need to read that, because FDA has flipped how environmental monitoring is done. Because in the past, and so, I was, in the food industry, in the dairy, and Alan as well too. And we would look at the environment in the plant and look at drains and walls and things like that and sample in those areas as we designed our programs. And the thought was that, well, okay, if there's salmonella or listeria or things like this in the plant environment, as we're cleaning the waters from the cleaning of the sanitation process and the overall, just the mechanics of how things work, are going to collect in the drains. So if our drains are clean, that means everything else is clean. And that was a huge assumption by industry that was true. What do you think of that assumption, Alan?
Well, I think we've learned that assumption is not a bad place to start. But if that is your whole program, you're going to get into trouble real quickly. I was at a 3A sanitary standards annual meeting and educational conference in Minneapolis last week. And one of the responsibilities I had was to gather equipment, food processing equipment from boneyards. And then we had CCEs evaluate it. Now, why does this tie into environmental monitoring? Well, guess what? Some of those pieces of equipment were legs upon which equipment is placed. And guess what was in those legs? They were hollow, which is not a problem, except the holes were drilled through the outer surface. So you had this perfect environment in which to get something in. And the adage is, if bacteria can get in, I don't care what the pressure gradient is, they will get out. And so, there's so many things. So what happens if it's in the leg, and as you're spraying down the floor, you fill that leg up and it starts weeping out the hole? You can clean the drain, you can clean the floors all you want, and guess what? Every time you fill that little leg and it weeps out the hole, you're recontaminating the environment. And then people track through it. Somebody's got a high pressure washer, you've got an compressed air line that blows accidentally in the wrong place, and you aerosolize things. So it's your point's a very good one.
Yeah, and so FDA has looked at this and said, this approach doesn't work very well. And getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning of our discussion, which is FDA swabathons and environmental monitoring sampling programs. Because FDA looks at this two ways, right? There's two different levels of FDA inspections within facilities, of which everybody knows, right? We've come out of COVID now. FDA investigations and inspections in plants are doing this, right? They are going way, way up because they're out in the field again. And they can do what they call a GMP audit, which is they're going in and they're looking at how you're doing things. They don't have any particular concern. They're going to go out in the plants and watch people washing their hands. They may look at some records and things like this, but it's not going to be very in-depth. The next level of investigation and inspection from FDA is a for cause. And with that means that, let's say a consumer ate some Jif peanut butter and said, man, I had this peanut butter and I think I got sick, right? And FDA will go, right? And maybe 2 or 3 other people write into FDA or email FDA and say, hey, I had this Jif peanut butter and da-da-da, right? And FDA is like, whoa, okay, we may have a problem here. And they'll go to the plant. They have a reason to go there. Now, that may also be your high-risk industry. It may be that they want to go in and do some swabbing, right, directly. But they will go in with a very specific mission, and they're going to really get into your food safety plan and be out in your plant. And if they need to, they're going to do that swabathon. And to your point, Alan, FDA has trained teams, right? It's not the investigator who just came in, but that person can pick up that phone and call the district office and say, hey, listen, I'm seeing some stuff here. Let's bring in the team. And before you know it, your plant is crawling with FDA personnel who are highly trained on how to look for and find salmonella and listeria in your plant. And when that happens, wow, your world has just changed.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, I think FDA right now is an embarrassment to themselves and to the American public and to Congress. And they know that. And, unfortunately, there's a new FDA commissioner. So how is it you become the commissioner under, under war conditions, battle conditions, when you're losing the war? I think that they're going to be admonishing their field staff to go in with for-cause mentality. Yeah. And I'm so happy you brought that up. First of all, they haven't been in facilities. So the question was, during the COVID era, we didn't really see a lot of uptick in anything. But maybe, it's one of these things where we didn't know what we didn't know. Yeah. And you look over the past 3 or 4 months, there were at least 4 national outbreaks. Now, they were not massive, where FDA had no clue what the food was, where it was coming from, and salmonella was one. Now, maybe it was Jif. Maybe there's still others lingering out there. So there are some very big problems, and this isn't the topic of our conversation today, but I think for those of you that think it's business as usual at FDA, be very careful, because I think they're almost the mentality guilty till proven innocent, and they have to be that way to reestablish their credibility. And environmental monitoring is one way that they can provide more information about, eyes, ears, sensory. Yes, that's helpful. Experience, helpful. Environmental monitoring, swabbing, very helpful.
Oh yeah. And FDA is going back, as you referenced before, Alan, they have this massive database of information from whole genome sequencing. The last I heard, and this was years ago, is they had over 1 million samples now in that database of different fingerprints from bacteria that they had found in different locales. So what does FDA do with that? Right? They will go in and do a swabathon. They will go back to that database and essentially, everybody probably remembers remember that cold case, the criminal shows, right? Where investigators will go back and look at past murders and try and figure out if they can figure out who the killer was. And FDA will do the same thing with these environmental swabs. And they'll say, okay, we found this salmonella in the Jif plant. Are there any other strains of this salmonella in our database? And if there are, they'll link those cases up like they did with Bluebell ice cream in Texas. And they will go back and look at that and say, well, this problem's been going on in your plant for a long time. We've found other cases that are linked to your plant. You need to shut down, right? And they'll take severe action in those type of activities. And they may even move that over to criminal liability type issues under the Park Doctrine and refer to that to the Department of Justice, right? This escalates really, really quickly. And one of the things I wanted to get back to was the inspection operations manual. And thank you to Bryan Ravitch here in the comments. Bryan's awesome. He put the link directly to what I'm talking about. So copy that link. There was a couple people here in the comments who were asking for that link. So Mark, that's right underneath where you're at, right there on the comments. Pull that dude up. Read the chapter on environmental monitoring. So earlier I had said that FDA flipped their approach. They are doing exactly the opposite of what we have done in industry forever. They are going in and they are sampling specific zones at specific times. And so just a quick little, kind of how does industry look at this? So generally in food plants, we break it down into 4 zones. So you have zone 4s, which are your drains. You have zone 3s, which are surfaces that are not adjacent to production areas, but are still kind of in the general area. So let's say you have a big room and it's controlled with GMPs. Your zone 4 would be your drains. Your zone 3s may be the walls, right? The walls and other areas within there where you want to keep track of what's going on. Zone 2s are indirect contact surfaces. So think buttons on machines. FDA loves to sample PLCs and buttons on machines because generally during sanitation, those pieces of equipment are very, very sensitive. So the sanitation guys will cover those with plastic and clean over the outside and keep those things dry, which means if there was something on the gloves or the hands of that operator and he's touching that stuff all day long, that's being transferred, right? That's a zone 2. Zone 1 is a direct contact surface. So think like a belt on a machine where product is moving through. Then of course you have the product itself. Now, here's where FDA has changed the game. FDA is sampling almost exclusively. They'll do some, depending on the situation, zone 1 and zone 2. Direct contact and indirect contact surfaces. And they want to do it ideally at least 4 hours within your production shift. So you are running, product is going down the line, and FDA is all over your plant sampling, zones 1 and zones 2. Now, let's say that you have a traditional model, Alan, and all you're doing is drains. You're blind. You have no idea what they're going to find.
I'm glad you put that out there, because let me give you some thoughts of mine. And these are not exactly aligned with FDA. I'm not challenging, because we have to set our system up for success. And doing so is knowing what the government is expecting and then going beyond that. So the issue of environmental monitoring and swabbing your zone 1s, your product contact surfaces, that is the game that FDA is playing. That is the requirement. They're training their field staff to do that. Now, does that mean we should do that in the industry? I'll tell you, my opinion is no. And that's really strange. And I'd like to hear from others, and you as well, Bryan. I'll tell you why. We've got ATP, which is much more effective. It is real time, and it indicates if we are using it properly and it is calibrated properly, we get a result that we can then go back and reclean the equipment, which is the product contact surfaces. Mm-hmm. Environmentals, you take a swab and you may get a presumptive in 24, 48 hours, and then you want to confirm probably, or maybe you don't. You just presume the presumptive is all I need, I'm going to go. But you know what? Did you stop using that equipment during those 24 to 48 hours? The answer is no. And all of a sudden, you have created a significant problem unless you've held that product until you get the results. If you've released that product, you essentially need to go into a recall mode or a product withdrawal mode of some kind. And that is not a good situation to be in. So while FDA has mandated its field staff, the draft guidance, particularly on Listeria, which you can equate to pathogens, even though it's a draft guidance on Listeria document, which says the industry should be doing zone 1 product contact, it doesn't require it. I think that if you have a robust cleaning program that's validated and ATP, you have addressed zone 1. I strongly support zone 2, which is the outside of product contact surface, mostly equipment, and zone 3, which are floor drains. And I know that we can't dismiss that, as important it is. And zone 3 can also be your buttons, your doorknobs, your whatever. And frankly, FDA, I don't ever remember hearing them do zone 4. And so I don't know if the industry has to do zone 4. Those are loading docks. Those are bathrooms. Those are, areas that we don't have the resources, nor is it all that important right now. But I'd like your opinion. I know that is not universally held opinion. Certainly regulators do not like that view. But I think that if we use the tools of science and being smarter in this new era of food safety, which Frank Yanis promotes, I think this is a very reasonable approach. Thank you.
Yep. Well, I think the bottom line here is that you need to be able to prove it, right? You need to be able to prove that what you're doing in your plants is clean. And to your point, ATP and allergen swabbing and these type of things are tools that you can use to verify your sanitation, right? Again, verification and validation. Validation is making sure that your sanitation program is set up correctly. Flow, temperature, time, all those type of elements, working with your sanitation companies. And then verification is making sure that what you set up continues to work. Now, part of this is, and I think this is why things are very confusing at this point relative to this, is I agree with what you're saying, but there's times where I would recommend actually zone 1 and zone 2. So let's say, for example, that you're doing a product that has no kill step. You're making a ready-to-eat product, you're doing something like that, and you are relying strictly on the goodwill, right? The proper processes of your suppliers, right? So you're getting all these ingredients in from your suppliers, and yeah, you're doing a great job of cleaning your equipment and everything is good on your side, but there's a couple of your suppliers that are maybe a little marginal, right? And sampling of incoming raw materials for pathogens, very hit or miss. You may find it, you may not. Are you going to rely on their COA? Maybe just a continuing guarantee. But the whole point on that is, let's say that you have an issue in the field and a consumer says, oh, hey, I ate your product and it made me sick. Your ingredients could be a potentially huge risk there. So what can you do to mitigate that risk, right? So all of these things are contextual, right? There's no one size fits all for every plant. Every company is different. Every plant is different. And this gets back to some of the comments here that we have in here from our guests, which is, who audited Jif? What went wrong with Jif? What do we know about that? Can we discuss more about that? And that's a big flaw that we currently have in our system, which is we have a big event like this that happens. Unlike the National Transportation Safety Board or something like this, when an airplane wreck happens, right? They go out, they do a huge investigation, they put the pieces of the wreckage from the plane in a hangar, right? And we've seen these shows, right? And they go and they do a forensic investigation to figure out what the heck happened. Was it a mechanical failure? Was it pilot error? Was it weather? What was it? But then they come out with a report and they say, here was the cause of this airplane wreck. Here are the things that we are going to do to help prevent this in the future. And everybody sees that. That doesn't happen in the food industry, right? If a food company has a big issue, there's some information that comes out. But by and large, guys, and this gets back to the comments here, and I think this is a huge problem, is we can't learn from each other. And part of this is liability and other company concerns, right? Protecting your brands and stuff like this. But we're never going to see where a food company comes and says, yes, we had this big recall. We did these type of actions. Here's what our key findings were, and here's what we've done to correct it. You never see that.
Well, you don't see it from the company, but I will tell you that, and this is partly in defense, I sound a little bit critical of my former agency, and I don't mean to. I just trying to present reality. But we will find out. The problem is timing. When will we find out? For instance, if it wouldn't have been for the whistleblower report in Abbot, and these are allegations, right? We don't know if they are true. FDA is conducting an investigation there, but we got very quickly our head under the tent, and into the inner workings of Abbott, at least as the allegations of the whistleblower. We don't have that with Jif, but I will guarantee you that FDA will do investigations. They're doing investigations now. We will hear what their best sense is of what happened. And I really think it comes down to two things. And this is speculation. I have no inside information with Jif. Is that either their roasting was compromised or they had post-roast contamination. And where can that contamination come from? Environmental. It had to be one of those two. So it's very appropriate for the discussion today. I've got a question for you, Bryan, and I hope it's not taking away, but it is probably tying in. Whole genome sequencing, which you did a nice overview of. I'd like your views. FDA is doing it. When a company gets a positive presumptive environmental or a confirmed environmental that is pathogenic, or an indicator organism, which is a strong indication. But if they get a positive pathogen, should they go to whole genome sequencing to determine whether they've got a resident strain or a new strain or a transient strain? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a hard question, right? It is that it's going to depend on the operation, right? So how big is the plant? How much, cross traffic do you have? What are the risks in those particular areas? Have you had hits in the past, right? My view on these type of things is, as a general statement here, is more information is better. Because part of this is, and this is where we're kind of starting to adjust our mindset and how we look at these things, is in the past, right? You would only do, generic. You would say, okay, all I want to know is it salmonella or listeria? I'm not taking it any farther than that. Well, that's good baseline information, but maybe, right? And this is what I've been looking at really highly, and I've worked with some clients on this, is should we take it farther? And in some cases, we've said, yes, we should, because that could be then potentially good defensive information for your company. Because if FDA comes back and says, okay, well, we did a Swabathon and we found this particular listeria strain in your plant, and we've referenced this back to what we've seen in our database, and therefore we want you to do X. Well, you can come back and say, well, that's interesting because here's our results, and we did not find that strain. Here's the strain we found. maybe we've had some cross-contamination at the lab, maybe something else is going on, right? So you can have a discussion and move that forward. If you don't have that data, it's all going to be FDA's information.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're absolutely right. I think what I'm seeing with the clients I work with is more and more are going to whole genome sequencing if they get presumptive positive or more likely confirmed pathogens in their environmental sampling. And then this is a database. And you said it so well. So why should we wait until FDA does this and comes up with something? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong. Well, frankly, it's good that FDA is doing environmental monitoring and sampling. But I think we need to, as an industry, do it. If you're not ahead in your program of food safety from where the government regulations are, you're apt to fail sooner or later and fail in a big way. So we have a lot of tools. I know Frank Giannis with his focus on this new era of smarter food safety, because he came out of the industry, knows there are things that are available to the industry, and some of these are not that costly. So I think that we need to really consider doing more. And the other thing I'd like to say is testing, whether it's product testing or environmental testing. You can never test to prove safety. You can only test to prove contamination. So, on the one hand, you say, well, I'm just giving up because of what you said, Alan. You've just blown my whole program up. The idea is it's an indicator. It is one of many tools. For instance, when a law enforcement agency is trying to solve a crime, do they use only fingerprinting? No, of course not. They use many different tools. So the environmental testing, monitoring, product testing, which is not a subject of our discussion today, these are tools, but we can't rely on them alone. So, good for those that are testing, environmental monitoring, and be strategic also. I have looked at environmental monitoring programs where they identify the sampling locations, and I almost always find really strange, and the heart is in the right place for our quality assurance people, right? They really want to do the right thing. But if you've been around for a while, you know where things are likely to be and where things are not likely to be. And so be strategic about where you choose your locations. And FDA has given us some insight. Many of you have experience. And I would really be curious. We have a guest from England, and I know they can't converse with us directly, but I would like to learn more, because the first major batch of infant formula coming from outside the U.S. that doesn't have to comply strictly with U.S. infant formula regulations is coming from the U.K. And so what's happening outside the U.S.? Because, we're all in the big world together.
Yeah. Product can get, pretty quickly to the locations very fast now from anywhere in the world. You said something that I think is very important, and I wanted to circle back to, is your design of your program. Because part of this, right, is I'm a young 25-year-old kid quality manager, right, just starting out in my career. And now I'm being asked to design the environmental monitoring program for a 500,000 square foot facility with 1,000 employees running around all over the place. Oh my goodness, right? What do you do, right? You can look up information and you can try and put together a sampling map and things like this. But pretty much in the industry, we do this on our own, right? And this is part of the reason why we do these food safety chats, is to share this information. So if we are talking to that 25-year-old quality manager, he or she can get some insight into say, oh, geez, I better kind of think about this. So the analogy I was thinking about when Alan and I were talking about this, getting ready for the show, is pest control, right? So we don't ask the quality manager to set up the pest control program. They manage the pest control program in most cases, but we bring in experts, right? We have certified pest control operators licensed by the state. They know how to handle the chemicals, and they'll come in and set up a sampling plan, and they'll say, okay, well, these are the points of ingress and egress in the plant. This is where potential pests can get in. These are the type of threats you need to worry about in the raw materials that you're using, if you're using flour or things like this, right? And they will then set up a plan and then go out and continue to monitor that, right? And then the quality manager will look at those reports and say, interesting. I see that we have some increased rodent activity outside the plant in this area. And the PCO will say, we're coming to fall and it's getting colder out. So the rodents and the other things that we don't want in the plants are coming closer to our operations. we better up our efforts to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, so you're taking preventive action based on the data. Environmental sampling and monitoring, this whole program that we're talking about is pest control times 10 times for sophistication, right, of what we need to be doing. And you need to be looking at patterns of traffic and areas of likely contamination and how the equipment, to your point earlier, Alan, is designed. And do you have any potential issue in those areas? Training people how to do the proper sampling technique, right? We've all seen people who do this, right? Boop, right? And that's their sample, right? Instead of that nice big grid where you just got to scrub the heck out of it, right? Are you using sponges? Are you using swabs? Who's doing the testing? In a quick little story in the past from a contamination issue for a company I was at, is we had this raw milk route. So a little context on this for everybody. When you're a dairy manufacturer, right, you send out milk trucks, and the milk trucks go to the farms and they pick up the milk from the bulk tanks from the farmers, and then they put it in the tank and they bring it back to the plant. Well, at each stop along the way, the driver is trained on how to pull samples of the milk, because you need to evaluate the milk for your chemistry requirements, but also your micro requirements. And there was one round in particular, Alan, that we just kept having all kinds of micro issues. And we're like, oh, geez, what's going on, right? And there was about 10 or so farms on this route. And we went and we talked with the farmers, and we audited their techniques, and they were doing everything perfect. And we're like, what is going on here? Why do we keep getting these hits? And they just get every single week. And so finally I sent one of my regional quality people to go along with the driver. So she flew out to the state and actually got in the truck. And sampling for this is done in Whirlpack bags. So if you're not familiar with Whirlpack bags, it's a little plastic baggie with a twist tie on the top, and it's sterile, and you tear it off and you pour your sample in. Well, she was watching him prepare, and he was, he washed his hands and did everything perfectly. He gets to the sampling stage. So he tears the top of the Whirlpack off. He opens it up a little bit, and he blew in it to expand the bag to put the sample in. and my regional quality person went, bah, right? And the carrier's like, what? And she's like, oh my God. And that was it. Right? So now imagine in the plant, you have a technician who is pulling your environmental monitoring, and you've done an amazing job of putting together a program, and they don't know proper sterile technique. You're fooling yourself, right?
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you're chasing all these phantom hits, trying to figure out where they come from. But in reality, it was part of the problem was the sampling technique. There are so many things that can go wrong in these programs. And part of this, Alan, and why we have these conversations is don't try and if you're that young kid trying to start out on this and set this up, you have a giant burden on your shoulders. Don't think that you have to do it by yourself, right? There's tons of expertise out there. People like me and Alan, and there's all kinds of people, right? Our sponsor, EAS Consulting Group, has tons of amazing consultants who can help in these type of areas. Bryan Rabbit, who's on the conversation here, is involved with those type of projects as well too. So there's tons of expertise out there, right? Don't set up a program, cross your fingers, sit in your office, and hope to God it's going to work, because it's probably not.
Well said. I think one of the presumptions we need to work with when we're doing environmental monitoring is it's there. If we go in with the fact that it's not there and we're not likely to find it, we probably aren't going to find it. And so I think we need to go in with the presumption it's there. We just have to figure out where it's hiding.
Yeah.
And if we have that mindset and we still don't find it, it may not be there, or we just aren't finding it. But if we go in with the mindset that it's not there, I'll guarantee you it's not likely that you're going to find these. Now, one of the questions I have too is, we do yeast and mold plating, at least some facilities do. And this is important for, products that might be subject to mold growth. Maybe they're not refrigerated, higher water activity, more neutral pHs, could be a lot of reasons. But is the yeast and mold plating, is that really an important part of environmental monitoring? Because there are very few pathogenic yeasts or molds. There are a few, but not many. So does that really provide any information for us? Or is that moving ahead of where, because the government doesn't require that? Or is that a tool that the industry can use to move one step ahead? I'd like your thoughts.
Well, I mean, so part of this, right, is looking at your general plant cleanliness. So a lot of plants will put out air plates and look at, just general yeast and mold or standard plate counts in the air. So that means, okay, is our HVAC system sufficient? Do we have the right airflow within the plant? If we don't have positive airflow in our GMP areas pushing out to the other areas, maybe things are getting sucked into the air in that plant that we don't know about. So those can provide powerful tools. To your point, you can look at indicator organisms, right? So one of the things that we've seen in recent years is Enterobacter, where you're looking at a larger family that contains pathogens. So if that's not there, well, then your pathogen's probably not there. So you can indirectly look at these things as well. So part of this is why did the dairy industry pick coliforms as an organism that they would test for sanitation? Well, it survives in the same type of processes and environmental controls that Salmonella does. So if you kill the coliform, well, you're probably killing the Salmonella too, right? So that's why industry would look at these things, even back in the 40s and 50s, was an indirect way of managing these systems. So yes, I think, Alan, to answer your question in a long-winded way, is that there's definitely benefit for those type of things. Earlier, a person here had mentioned in the chat compressed air and things like this, right? You may have things hiding in your compressed air that you don't know about. And the industry was very surprised, a few decades ago when we found out that organisms were coming out of that compressed air they were using to blow product off of the line, right? It's like, oh, okay, what's going on there, right? Bacteria are pretty amazing.
Well, maybe we are a little too fixated on this, Bryan, because if I've got a dry processing environment and a dry product, then why do I worry? Because we all were told in Micro 101 that we need three things for bacteria to survive. We need moisture, we need a food source, and we need the right temperature range. Mm-hmm. So if I don't have moisture, or it's a dry environment, what's the big deal? Maybe for those environments, I either don't do environmental monitoring or I do it very reduced. Uh-huh. I'm going to give you a quick thought, and I'd like to hear your. So let me just say one word: Lucky Charms.
Yeah.
What? It's a dry product produced in a dry environment, and it is many of these breakfast cereals that are popular in the U.S. are essentially puffed by shooting them out of guns, and that's a crude way of describing a technology. And it's a heated mixture that's shot out of gun, and the presumption by the industry for a number of years was just what I said. And also the fact that the heat of the mixture as it was coming out of the gun was such that it would kill pathogens. And guess what we learned? Salmonella does very well in that environment. So love your thoughts. Should we do environmental?
And I'll add to this, Honey Smacks, same thing. So in 2018, they had the same issue. Does anybody remember a giant issue with E. coli in flour? Who would have thought that, right? It's a dry environment. Hey, we don't have to worry about it. But what we found out is just because it's not growing, doesn't mean it's not there, right? So you could have flour and you get some bacteria hanging out and they're just kind of waiting see what's going to happen. Well, then you take it home and you add some water to the cake mix and you let it sit on the counter for a while. Wow, hog heaven, right? They're going to town and they've got everything that you just described that they need, right? So past assumptions on dry versus wet plants and how aggressive you need to be, I think are really being challenged.
I think so too. And to follow up with the Salmonella, which I know we shouldn't fixate on one organism, but Salmonella, the dairy industry learned 50 years ago that Salmonella was a particularly serious problem in its dry powdered products. And now that is common knowledge for anybody in the food industry that has a dry product of some kind, low moisture, low water activity. But one of the examples, this is kind of a war story, if you will, that there was a facility. This happened to be a dairy facility that had a Listeria problem, and this was back in the 80s. And they did all the things they could then, and it wasn't that they were in the dark ages. They were just, we may have a few more tools, but they certainly were enlightened people. They could never, ever get it out of their environmental sampling regime. So they identified where it was coming from. It was coming from a wall.
Mm.
And when you wash that wall, apparently, even though they did everything to seal cracks, it would weep out of that wall onto the floor. People would track it around and eventually ended up in their product. So they walled off. They actually put a new wall around that area, moved whatever equipment, and not a lot. They just did the minimum they could, walled it off, and for the next 20 years, no salmonella.
Wow.
And then a new plant manager came in. They were short of space. They were doing some changes in the line setup. And so they tore that false wall out. And I can tell the rest of the story. You know exactly what happened. The salmonella came back with a vengeance. They ended up shutting that facility down for that reason only. And it wasn't because they had a failure in their environmental monitoring program. Their environmental monitoring program picked it up, identified it, but they could never solve it. So the idea is you may occasionally, and so far I've only heard of this with salmonella, you may get an environmental pathogen where you cannot eradicate it from the facility. Now, listeria, you feel that way sometimes because, every other month you get something or every 3 months it comes up. So is it hiding in the plant? Well, yes, it could be. But with listeria, it's more likely it's being brought in.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're doing environmental monitoring, you not only just do the sampling and then you do the cleanup until you don't get a positive anymore, you try to figure out the root cause. Is it the pallet jack? Is it the forklift? Is it somebody tracking it in, from home because we don't have any captured shoe policy? Yeah. This is really all part of environmental monitoring, even though it seems a one-off.
And that's a good point, because one of the things that we're shooting for is complete eradication in the plant environment. And to your point, is that possible? Well, hopefully, right? It may not be, but if it's not, you just can't go and put up with it either, right? Part of this, and what people forget too, Alan, is that under FSMA, everything associated with your food safety plan, the prerequisites, the preventive controls, the plan, everything, FDA has complete regulatory authority to look at all that information. So your environmental monitoring program for FDA is an open book, right? Everything that you have in there, you have to share with FDA. And so this gives plants heartburn too, right? Now, part of this is that what does FDA not want to see, right? They don't want to come in and see an environmental monitoring program where you take 3 samples a quarter and you haven't found anything for 5 years, right? They're going to look at that and say, that's a pretty crappy program, right? You're not actively, aggressively looking and trying to find these things, right? FDA, I think currently, and this gets back to earlier comments that we made in this conversation, is FDA is going to look at that as guilty until proven innocent, right? You haven't shown that you have a good program in place. And odds are that field investigator is going to pick up the phone and say, hey, listen, we need to dig deeper into this plant and maybe do a swabathon. What do you think, boss? Right? And then the district director will take a look at that and decide what to do. Not knowing is a lot worse, a lot worse.
And I think one thing, and Bryan Ravitch, our colleague who spent his career at FDA, if this is not on track, please say something or put something in the chat. But FDA takes regulatory action based on 2 primary premises. One is when there is a smoking gun, Jif, Abbot, Lucky Charms, the product was contaminated, found the contamination. People got ill or not ill, that's not the issue. If they found the contamination in the product, FDA will take action. The other is when they establish there are conditions which may lead to contamination. So they can take regulatory action simply based on the conditions that they find, whether those are GMP or environmental monitoring or a combination of all of that and other things. So on the one hand, that seems to be an incentive to have a really crappy environmental monitoring program, because if I have had a good one and I'm finding things, I've just given FDA the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, because now I have established that there are conditions which may lead to contamination. Mm-hmm. Please understand that is actually the wrong mentality, but I know plants that have that. The mentality is this: what do you do after you have that information? That's what FDA wants to know. FDA has very intelligent, well-trained people, and they have trained their field staff and their compliance staff to ask that next question. Okay, so you are getting positives every 3 months, or you're, intermittent. And the question they're not going to just simply, start the warning letter process or start some kind of compliance action against you. They're going to ask the next question: what did you do based on that? And that is the key. So I know that it was common to try and have minimalistic environmental monitoring, because it seemed like we were essentially giving all of the prosecutorial information that FDA needed. We were creating it and giving it to them, and that's actually the wrong thing. And I think, Bryan, I'd like your thoughts on this, but they want to know what you do once you get that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And really, I mean, this kind of gets back to when we were talking about this topic and preparing for this, we broke it down into 2 buckets: old school and new school, right? Yeah. So what Alan has just described there is perfectly fitting into that, right? Old school was, okay, if I don't know it's there, it can't hurt me. And I'll wait for FDA to come in and tell me it's there, and then I'll do something about it at that point in time, because I don't want to build my own case against. So I'll do some random sampling, and I'll pick some locations right. Versus new school, which is, no, I'm going to assume that there are pathogens in my environment. I'm going to aggressively look for them. I'm going to set up a program based upon my risk and my product category profile and how my plant is set up and all these parameters. Based upon that, I'm going to have a set number of swabs that I'm going to be doing every month, every quarter, whatever. I'm going to have technicians who are extremely trained in how to do this. I'm going to use either an internal lab at corporate or a third-party laboratory for testing that I trust the results of. And when I find things, and this is to your point, Alan, when I find things, I take action, right? And it's kind of like the old vector analysis on steroids. It's like, okay, if I have an environmental monitoring hit in the plant on a floor by a machine, man, I'm going to town, right? I'm not going to take 3 to 5 samples and say, oh, okay, I'll do a boot, and I'll do all right, here's a forklift. I'll take a look at the forklift, and if I don't find it, everything is fine. Really? Maybe not, right? And this gets back to, I mean, one of the things that we know very well in food safety and quality assurance is new sets of eyes, Alan, often are extremely valuable, because you or I or someone else will walk into a production facility, and FDA is doing the same thing, right? They will walk in and look at things that you walk by every day, because you're just not paying attention to that, right? It's human nature. And we'll walk into a plant and say, what's that, right? And to your example, oh, does that machine have hollow feet? Oh, interesting. Let's take a closer look at that, right? Let's get the maintenance guys up here and kind of jack that machine up a little bit and take that leg off and see what's inside, right? Those type of things, right? That if you're in there day in and day out in the plant, you don't notice. And having that external expertise is extremely important, right? And being able to set up a robust program and a follow-up and corrective actions and trainings and all these type of things. And even as we were talking about, what are you even testing for? Is your plant dry? Is it wet? All these type of things. And part of this always comes back to your quality programs aren't enough, right? When you're sitting down belly button to belly button with FDA in the plant, and they say, we want to review your environmental monitoring program, you just don't shove the document in front of them and say, here you go, right? You need to be able to explain why you do what you do. And here's the important part, Alan. I want people, if you take one thing away from today, it's here's what we do, and here are the things we don't do, and here's why we don't do those, right? So with your particular analogy with the area that the plant walled off where they had an issue, right? Do you want to explain that to FDA? Maybe, maybe not, right? It's going to be based upon the context, but you need to know that in advance, right? Because if FDA goes to that area and starts, wiggling on that door and saying, what's in here, right? Oh, that area is no longer food production, and here's why, right? Will that be an uncomfortable conversation? Maybe, but you need to think about your responses in advance. Thinking them up on the fly is always a bad idea.
That's very good. I like your analogy about the door that nobody goes into, because FDA, again, complimenting their field staff, if it is difficult to get to grab an environmental sample, I will guarantee you FDA will sample. One of the places that we as industry hate to take swabs from is the underside of tanks and equipment that are 2 inches off the floor or 6 inches off the floor. And how do I get back there? So how do I get under there? So you know what? We just shoot some water under there with good sanitizer, and we just hope for the best. And I will guarantee you that FDA will find a way to get that sample, and I will guarantee you they'll find something. The locked door mentality, really, we need to think about where are our mental locked doors in the environmental monitoring program and open those doors up.
Ooh, that's a great analogy. I love that. Bryan made a good point here is, the secondary eye thing is condenser units for cooling systems in plants, right? Generally up on the ceiling, right? And condensate would drip off of those suckers. And perfect environment for listeria. Right? And so until we started looking at this and saying, oh, geez, that's a huge issue. Let's put some drip pans under there. Let's put some quaternary ammonium rings in those to kill anything that may be in there. How are we actually going to clean those things, right? Are they over food contact open areas? Where are they, right? All these type of things you need to be looking at. And if you're just doing this, right, you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, this is somewhat tangential, but not exactly. One of my pet peeves is trench drains versus circular drains. Now, there are good reasons for trench drains. If the amount of water that you are discharging in your facility based on cleanup and such is just overwhelming, just typical floor drains, then a trench drain is probably appropriate. But I will guarantee you keeping those clean and swabbing them and getting negative swabs out of those trench drains is very difficult. And I'm working with a company that is retrofitting an old pharmaceutical plant to turn into a food processing plant right now. And what did the engineers do? Put trench drains all over the place. And once we calculated the amount of water that was going onto the floor, we didn't need any trench drains and cleaning them. So if you have trench drains, please make sure you're not just taking one swab out of one corner of the trench drain and saying, oh, it's okay. Those can be nightmares, and we are stuck with them. We're not going to be tearing floors up and moving out trench drains if we don't need them. Right.
So I think all of this comes back to a couple of comments that we had, and this is kind of a good way to bring this back up, I think, to the 30,000 foot to end our conversation today, which absolutely flew by. We see comments in here from people who are saying, well, who audited Abbot? Why did this happen at Jeff, right? These type of things. And those questions are valid, right? And we need to look at those. And if you can say to yourself, if I sit here on this live stream and say, oh, well, I know the answer, so no, I don't, right? I don't. I can help, right? But these type of things are a massive effort and require lots of input and expertise, right? And so we need to learn from these, and that's the whole existence of why the Food Safety Chat is here, is to help spread this information and to get people thinking and to give access to that new perspective, that virtual set of eyes, right, which is what we're kind of doing right now, is we're poking people, right? We're saying, you should think about this. And how many samples are you taking? And what methodology are you using? And how trained are your technicians, right? These type of things that we need to think about. The analogy I use in production facilities is the quality manager in a lot of ways is the conscience of the plant, right? They're the living, breathing representation of what the consumers want and what is expected to protect the brand. And I want to see them thinking about these type of things, right? I expect to see my quality managers at their desks working on new ways to do things. I don't want to see them running around like chickens with their head cut off all day long and then going home fighting fires and saying, whew, I did my job. No, you didn't, right? All you did was fight fires, right? The quality manager is there to make the plant better. And a big chunk of that is exactly what we're talking about here today. And unfortunately, I think it's just part of the DNA of what makes a good quality manager is we think that we have to take this all on our own shoulders. And you don't, right? There's lots of expertise out there that can help shortcut some of the extremely painful learning processes, because what Alan and I are talking about here today was learned through painful experience. Right? It wasn't that we were some geniuses that knew the answers. Nope. We made mistakes and went, oh, crap, what did I do? Right. And then you fix that. And that's the only way things get better, right? Is that realization. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I mean, there was tons of questions today, tons of information. So thank you very much for that. That makes my day. And it's going to make for a great Memorial Day weekend as well. So thank you everyone for that. And any closing thoughts on your side, Alan?
No, I think your wrap up was very good. We just appreciate everybody joining us, and please keep information circulating. That's Bryan, you said it best. Let's share information.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we know from quality assurance, it's consistency, right? If you're in charge of food safety, quality assurance, it's showing up every day and doing these type of things and getting better. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for helping to keep our food safe. And we will see you back here next week at the same time. So 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Did I say that right? 8 a.m. Mountain, 10 a.m. Eastern. There we go. And for the next food safety chat. So thank you everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you back here next Friday. Enjoy your kefir. Thanks, Alan. We'll talk to everybody soon.
Thanks, Bryan, for having me. Take care.